All right, welcome everybody to Learn to Crochet a Beginner Shawl. My name is Dana. I am the editor of Fave Crafts and I'll be emceeing the webinar today. I'm joined by Tamara, Tamara Kelly, who is instructing of Moogly blog. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started, and then we'll dive in because it's an exciting topic, a big topic to cover in 1 hour. So most important piece of information probably the most important is we are sending out a recording of this class 24 hours after it airs. So keep an eye out for an email from Zoom tomorrow with the link to the recording. So if you fall behind or you're overwhelmed or anything, we'll be sending that recording so you can rewatch the webinar. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can let us know either in the chat feature or the Q&A feature. The Q&A feature is a little easier for me to monitor, but whatever works. Let us know if you have questions throughout the webinar. And then actually, I think that's it for housekeeping. Pretty straightforward. I want to thank our sponsor, which is I Like Crochet magazine. I Like Crochet is a digital magazine that publishes 6 times a year. If you have never subscribed to the magazine before, we have an introductory offer for you as a thank you for attending the class today, which is 90% off. You can sign up for the magazine for a year and get it for just $5 US. That includes the 6 issues, but you also get access to every previously published pattern that the magazine has ever released. The magazine launched in 2014, so it's hundreds, maybe even thousands of patterns at this point. So it's a pretty cool setup, advantage to a digital magazine. So that link to get this deal is ilikecrochet.com/webinar22. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Tamara. Tamara is the designer and the creative mind behind Moogly. Moogly is a world famous blog for fresh, modern, and approachable crochet designs and a little knitting and crafting here and there. She's the author of Quick Crochet for the Home, past president of the Crochet Guild of America. And on Moogly, you'll find several new free patterns every month, top quality video tutorials, giveaways, and more. There's a new post almost every weekday and a free newsletter on Saturdays too, full of special extras. Welcome, Tamara. I'm so excited for today's class.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love making shawls. It's one of those things that I didn't start making until I'd been crocheting for a while, but once you start making them, they're kind of addictive on their own. So let's talk a little bit about shawls. Shawls, of course, can come in lots of shapes and sizes. The most common ones are kind of your even triangle, if you will, but there's asymmetrical shawls where you've kind of got the triangle stretched out on one side. You've got your rectangular wraps, which are really just kind of an oversized scarf you can wrap around yourself. People will do half circles, sometimes more than a half circle, sort of like a Pac-Man shape. So really there is a ton of variety and options there. Calling it a shawl is just kind of how you wear it. And of course, these days wear them front to back, all in front, kind of like a bandana scarf thing. Some people still wrap them around their shoulders. When I go to yarn events and shows, I see them being worn in so many ways. So they're still a very popular item. I know I love keeping one around, especially in the wintertime at my desk. It's great to just throw on. And of course, they make beautiful gifts. So today I really want to go over the most basic of shawls here, I would say, but with a couple little extras to make it, a little more educational and a little bit better, I think. Little things that I think will elevate your crochet to the next level. So this is the shawl that I've designed for this class, First Fall Shawl, and I use these beautiful orange tones because, the trees are turning and it's a beautiful time of year, but of course you can use any 3 colors you like. And if you look at it here, hopefully you can kind of see this on screen. We'll be looking at it, of course, a lot closer here in a little bit. But you can see I'm changing color every single row. And when you use 3 colors, you're able to change color every single row without having to break your yarn. So I'm going to be going over that today. As well as that, today I want to teach you how to do the magic circle. We're going to talk about front loop and back loop only. So that might be something new for some of you. And standing stitches. And then, of course, that striping and floating our yarn along the edges so that we can cover it up with a final border and not have to weave in extra ends. So hopefully you've got your handout. It's got lots of great links and more information if you need it. Let's go ahead and pull on the hand camera and we'll talk about what we're using today. All right, so Dana, are you able to hit that button? I've got all this stuff in front of me now.
I think it's spotlighted on
Is
my
it?
end.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. It's just a little different on my end, I think, because I'm the participant. So I'm going to hit the button so I can see it too. There we go. Okay, so I am using Patons Inspired today. You, of course, can use whatever yarn you like. This particular yarn is a 5-weight, a bulky. So I am using a pretty large hook. This is a 10 millimeter, get that to focus there. There we are, a 10 millimeter crochet hook. If you do not have a 5 bulky yarn, if you want to use a thinner yarn or a thicker yarn, that's fine. Just pick a hook size that works well with your yarn. And the great thing about this pattern is because we start at the top and work our way out getting bigger, you can just keep repeating those rows until you've got the size of the shawl that you want to make. So while we are getting set up here, you want to go ahead and find the ends to each of your balls of yarn. So we can get those all set up and kind of decide which one do you want to be A, which one do you want to be B, and which one do you want to be C. I am using a bulky yarn for this. You can absolutely use a bulky yarn, but like I say, really you can use any weight yarn you like, as long as you like the fabric you're getting with that hook. So let's take a close look here before we actually begin crocheting. Let me get it kind of straightened out here on my table. There we are, so we can see it. This is where we begin, right here. So we're actually crocheting this direction. Let me flip it around. There we are. This all straightened out here on camera. There we go. So we actually start, here is our row 1, then row 2, then row 3. So like I say, the great thing about this pattern is you really can make it with any yarn and hook, because we're going to start at the beginning and just grow our way out. So you can just stop when the shawl is the right size for you, whether that's a teeny tiny shawl or a great big shawl, totally up to you. It depends on how much yarn you have and how long you want to keep crocheting it and what size you'd like to wear. So you'll notice right here, we've got some sort of ridges right here. That's created by using front loop and back loop only stitches. And we've got increases all through the middle. So if you haven't done increases before, you're going to get to try those out as well. So in addition to the yarn and the hook, there's a couple of tools that make crocheting a whole lot easier. Of course, you've got your scissors and your yarn needle. But for today, we're really going to want to have, ideally, 3 stitch markers. Stitch markers for crochet, if you haven't used them before, are a little different than stitch markers for knitting. If you have used those typically close all the way. They're sort of a solid circle or a solid ring or a solid hoop. Stitch markers for crochet, you want to make sure you've got the kind that open. It might be still a ring with a little split in it, like a split ring. Sometimes those are called. Or it might be this safety pin style. Yeah, those kind of hard to see. Let me pull up a blue one there. You can see it just looks like a regular safety pin, but we need our stitch markers in crochet to be able to open back up. If it's a closed ring and we try and use those knitted stitch markers with crochet, they'll get stuck in our project permanently. So I'm a big fan of stitch markers. They have lots of uses when we're crocheting. And one of my favorite things is just the most obvious, to mark a stitch. When you are working a pattern, most of us, once we get going, especially if the stitches are simple enough, we're going to turn on Netflix or a movie, right? So we're not going to be staring at our work or staring at the pattern all the time once we've got it memorized. So our stitch markers can keep us on track. They help us know exactly where to begin and end each row, and they can tell us, exactly those particular special stitches in the middle of that row or round that we really need to pay extra attention to. So like I say, I recommend you get a couple of those stitch markers handy before you begin. So now let's start talking about making this particular shawl. Most patterns, and if you've got your PDF, ignore my colors here. My printer decided to run out of colored ink right while I was printing up this handout today. But we've got a couple of notes, and anytime you follow a pattern, whether it's for a shawl or anything else, it's a really good idea to look through your notes and your special abbreviations or any special stitches. So in my notes for this one, I've included instructions that you want to move your stitch marker up to the center stitch of each row as you go. And using stitch markers in the first and last stitch of each row is also recommended. So I'll be doing that while I teach today. Also, each row begins with a chain 2. This does not count as a stitch. Also, we're going to make sure, since we're carrying yarn along the sides, and I'll be demoing how to do that, that we cover that when we make our edging. And again, I'll be demonstrating that as well. We have one special abbreviation in this pattern that you might not have seen before and isn't necessarily standard. I use it pretty standardly. PM meaning place stitch marker. So that just tells you, as you're following along with the written pattern, which stitch to place the marker in. So let's go ahead and get started. Row 1, we're going to pick our color A. Before I actually begin crocheting, are there any other questions I can answer about the yarn or the hook? Dana, can you help me out with that?
I would love to. One person was asking, they've got a bulky yarn and or a different weight yarn, and they're asking if they still use the same hook. I said to use whatever hook the yarn suggests on the
Yeah,
label.
I
Does that
think
make
that's a
sense?
good way to go. You can either use the hook recommended on the label or a little bit bigger if you like the fabric. This one actually recommends a J, and I bumped up to a 10 because for a wearable with this particular yarn, I like to go a little bit bigger. So if it's yarn you've used before and you've got a favorite hook size to use with that yarn, whether it's the one recommended on the label or not, I would go with your favorite hook size. You want to make sure that your fabric has some drape to it. This is why I bumped up my hook size. So a lot of times designers will see, okay, this calls for a J hook, but I'm going to use a different hook size. If I wanted a stiffer fabric, like for a basket, something that sort of stood up on its own, I would go down. Sometimes there's a little bit of my hair in it, always a little bit of my hair in my projects. But sometimes when I want something with a little more drape and flow, a little bit looser, a little goosier fabric, that's when I will go up, sometimes several hook sizes to get the look of the fabric I want. This particular yarn, Patons Inspired, I think they were initially thinking more home decor, especially in a bulky. So especially with the bulky, when I'm using it for a garment, anything wearable, I really like to bump up the hook size. But again, this is personal preference. If you're using, for instance, Red Heart Super Saver, and you always use an I or a J hook or whatever it is with it, and you love the fabric it gets you, then that's what you should absolutely use. This is a very flexible pattern meant to work with pretty much any hook and yarn as long as you like the fabric that you're getting when you stitch. Were there any other questions I could answer before I get started?
Just two quick things.
Mhm.
One, Linda loves your sweater.
Oh,
So
thank you so much.
wanted
It's
to tell you
available
that.
free on my blog.
Yay. And then Michelle is asking any suggestions for a child size shawl so she can make a mother-daughter set as a gift.
Absolutely. This pattern will be perfect for that. As I said at the beginning, we start at the very smallest row. Where'd it go here on our full one? We start absolutely small and we just grow with each row. So you can stop whenever you say, okay, this is big enough for this child. That's the point you can stop at. A good rule of thumb, since, children come in different sizes, obviously, and I don't know if you're talking about a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old, look at their height. Height is usually about equal to wingspan, if you will, fingertip to fingertip, roughly. Everybody's a little different, but fingertip to fingertip is a good measurement for a shawl. And the easiest way to do that is to just look for their height, because most people don't take that measurement, but they'll know how tall they are. So you can ask, if it's a gift, you can ask the parent, somebody who might know how tall that child is, how tall they are, and then just work until the top flat section of the shawl, if you will, is about that width. And that would be your rule of thumb there.
Sweet.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to begin?
What's the name of your sweater pattern?
Thank you. It's the work from home cardigan.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Tamara. All
All
good.
right. Great. Okay, so whatever color you want to be, your color A is the one you want to start with. And we're going to start by making a magic circle. So this is something you may have tried before. Different people make it slightly differently. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the way I do it. I think it's a little easier than some. But if you've got a different way that you love to do it, you can absolutely start it your way. So a magic circle, we're going to take the end of our yarn, whatever we want our first color to be here, and we're going to come in a good 6 to 8 inches or so. Then I'm right-handed, so this is my non-hook hand here. So I'm going to go over my forefinger twice towards me, just like I was yarning over a hook. So let's do that again. I'm going to come towards me twice, just like that. So you can see the tail of the end of the yarn's right there. And I've just got those 2 loops right on my finger. Then I'm going to pick up my hook. I'm going to kind of secure those ends here. Got the end that's attached to my skein and the tail end here. I'm just going to hold those still. I always like to steady my work as best I can while I'm crocheting. Then I'm going to insert my hook under both of those loops. I'm going to make sure I leave enough room for it. There we go. Alrighty. I'm going to grab this furthest loop back and just pull it under the second loop. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull a loop through. This locks my magic circle together, and then I can start crocheting into the ring. So let's do that again. Pull it right back off my finger here. We're going to come in about 8 inches or so. Eyeball it. You don't have to measure it from your end. I'm going to go over my forefinger twice towards me, just like I'm yarning over a hook. I'm going to insert my hook under both of those loops. Grab the loop that's furthest back, the one that I made first, and pull it under the second one. So you can see I'm holding onto that tail end right there, move my thumb, to hold that down. Then yarn over and pull that loop through. That's how I make my magic circle. So now I'm ready to start crocheting into that circle. I'm going to leave my finger in there for the first couple of stitches to help stabilize it. So now I'm going to chain 2. 1 and 2. And then I'm going to work 7 double crochets into the ring. So to do that, I'm going to yarn over. And now I'm going to go right into that ring. Let me get a kind of good angle here on it. We want to go into the ring and make sure that tail end is on top of our hook as well. So the ring that's around our finger and that loose tail end should be on top of our hook before we yarn over and pull that loop through and finish that double crochet. Whoops. Sometimes it falls off. It's okay. We want to do it again anyway. We're going to go over our finger twice towards us. Insert our hook under both loops. Grab the furthest one back and pull it forward. Yarn over and pull through. Chain 2. There we are. And double crochet in the ring. So I'm going to yarn over both of those loops on top of my hook there, yarn over again and pull through, and finish my double crochet. So this first one, as you've seen, can be a little wonky, and if it's hard to keep your finger in there, once you've got a stitch in there, you can go ahead and pull it out. We've got a stitch in there, it's going to hold our ring open. So we've got the ring and we've got the tail. So every time we stitch in this ring, we want to make sure we work over this tail as well. This is what makes it magic at the very end. Now I've made my first stitch of the round, or the row rather. So I am going to use my first stitch marker to mark that first stitch. If you remember from our notes, that chain 2 does not count as a stitch. So I'm going to put my stitch marker right in the top of that first double crochet to mark that that's the first stitch of the row. I'm going to reinsert my hook in my loop here, and I need to work 6 more double crochets into that ring. So when I do that, I yarn over and I want to go into that ring, and again, make sure that that tail end there, the cut tail end, is on top of my hook as well. We really want to trap that inside each of these stitches. So there's my second double crochet. I'm just going to continue around, making more double crochets right into that ring. So there's 3, and here's 4. Now, if you read ahead in that row, which you should always read ahead on your instructions before you begin stitching, but I know many of us don't, you'll see at the end it says PM in 4th center stitch. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, this was that center stitch. So this is where we want to put our next stitch marker. And when I put that stitch marker in there, I put it right under the 2 loops at the top of the stitch. And then I've got 3 more to make, so I have a total of 7. So again, I'm just going right back into that ring. So there's 1 and 2 and 3. But I'm not going to finish that very last stitch. You'll see, as I was making that last double crochet, I still have 1 more yarn over and pull through to do. Otherwise, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches made. So before I finish that stitch, I'm going to put it down, and this is where I'm going to make my first color change. I'm going to bring in my second color for today, and I think I'll use this beautiful blue. So I'm going to pull up a little bit of yarn. Don't want to have too much tension on my working yarn here, and then I have to find the end again. There we are. And then So to change colors here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to yarn over and finish this last stitch of row 1 with my new color. So to do that, I simply find the end, and again, I'm going to come in 6 inches or so. Just lay that yarn right over my hook and pull it on through. Now, after I do that, I always like to give that green working yarn, the yarn still attached to the skein, a little bit of a tug so that it's in place. And then I continue crocheting with the blue. So let's do that. Let's do that together again. I'm going to pull that right back out. We've made our magic circle, chain 2, and we're double crocheting into the circle. We want to have 7 double crochets into our ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. We place a stitch marker in that 4th one. 1, 2, 3 more. So that would be 7 total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need 1 more. So when we make that last double crochet into the ring, we yarn over, we go into that ring, make sure that tail end, as always, is also on top of our hook. Yarn over and pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2, stop with 2 loops left on the hook, pick up our next color, color B, and we're just going to drape that right over our hook. We've got our tail end in front of us. We just drop that right over the end of our hook. And we pull that through, and that finishes that last double crochet of row 1. Now, we've changed colors, but we're not going to cut any yarn here. We're going to let this green hang out here, our color A, whatever your first color is. We're just going to let that yarn attached to our skein hang out on the side of our project. We're going to continue on with row 2 using color B. Before we do that, though, we can do the magic of our magic circle. So we want to find that tail end again, right there. I'm going to go ahead and just pull my hook out of the way for a moment, put it down here so it doesn't roll away. So this is the cut, oops, so you can see it here, there, the cut tail end of the green. And because we've crocheted over it the whole time, I can just give that a pull. And you can see that just closes right on up. Now we have a teeny tiny spot right there. When we go to weave in our ends at the end, we're going to want to make sure that we weave this end both directions through our stitching. One way and back the other, and maybe back the other again. When people complain that their magic circles come unraveled, it's because they aren't weaving in their ends in both directions. You really need to sort of lock that down. However, once you do, it is a very stable little spot right there and gives us a really nice closed beginning. So you can see, even though we start out with a magic circle, which is most often used for things in the round, it gives us a really great start to our shawl here. We've got that center stitch marked. We've got our new color on the hook. So I'm going to reinsert my hook in that stitch there. Oops. And you know what? Here's a little tip for you. I just put my hook in backwards. How can I tell? Because I can see the cut end right there, and I want that to be in front of my hook when I join, just like that. There we are. So you can sort of cinch up on those ends a little bit so you get that loop on your hook the right size again, and then we're ready to move on to row 2. So for row 2, it's going to be pretty similar. I'm going to chain 2, and when I do that, I like to really use my fingers to secure all these loops right here so nothing pulls out. So I'll just go ahead and pinch that right with my fingers and do my chain of 2. There we are. Make sure I'm working with the yarn attached to the skein and not the tail end. And then we can turn. Now, if you prefer, you can turn and then chain 2. It's totally up to you, whatever you like. Great question. Somebody asked what's the benefits of using the magic circle as opposed to chaining 4. And generally, it's because we can get that totally closed in the middle. Sometimes when you chain a circle and then work into that, you're left with a little hole there in the middle. So sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes it's better to chain 4 and join into a ring rather than making the magic circle. It just depends on the look you're going for that particular project. So for row 2, we've got our chain 2, and our first instruction is to put 3 double crochets in the first stitch. So we'll go ahead and yarn over and put 3 double crochets right into that very first stitch. Now that it made that first one, I'm going to go ahead and put my stitch marker in there as well. Someone just asked, are you using the same yarn in the pattern? Yes, different colors, but yes, the exact same yarn. Patons Inspired is the yarn I am using today. I took the label off of it, but if you need to see the label, that is what it looks like right there. I prefer to pull this one from the outside, so I did remove the labels from my skeins before I began today. All right, there we go. So now we have our 3 stitches right there, okay? Then it says to double crochet in each stitch to the marked stitch. That means we double crochet in each stitch until we get to the one with the stitch marker in it. So we insert our hook, double crochet in each stitch until we get to that very center stitch, which has the stitch marker in it. And there we are. Because we're only on row 2, we get there pretty quickly. When we get to that center marked stitch, we work 3 double crochets in there and PM in center of those 3 stitches. So that means we go right into that marked stitch. You can take that stitch marker out if it's going to be in the way. There we go. So there's 1 and 2 and 3. So we put 3 stitches in the first stitch of this row, right there. That's going to help us maintain our straight line across. Then we put 3 stitches in the center stitch, and we're going to replace that stitch marker in the center of those. That's going to be an increase that gives us that triangle shape right in the middle there. Then we just double crochet again in each stitch until we get to the end. This is where having that stitch marker will be really handy because it makes it easy to remember that that's the last stitch we want to work into, that we're not going to need to work into that chain 2 or whatever else you wanted to use there for that first stitch. So we come to that very last one. We see our stitch marker right there. We know that's the last place we need to be working into, and we want to work 3 double crochets into this last stitch. We do this to maintain that straight line across the top. This means we're going to do the same thing in the first and last stitch of each row. Yes, you put the stitch marker in the middle of the 3 double crochets that's in the center there. And then additionally, you can mark the first and last stitch of each row. But this one is the most important stitch marker you want to have. Marking the first and last stitch of each row just helps you keep track as you're crocheting, so you always know where to begin and end. So then I just move that stitch marker right on up that new last stitch of the row. Now, I made a mistake. Did you spot it? I finished that stitch. We're changing colors every row. I do this most of the time when I'm changing colors. Happens all the time. Pull that stitch marker right back out. You can pull out that whole stitch if you want to, or just pull out that last loop and yarn over and get your hook back in there. If that's too much, you can just take that whole stitch out and we'll make it one more time. But we're going to stop with 2 loops left on the hook. Then it's time to pull in our third color, whichever color again you want to use. I'm going to use this beautiful purple today. So what do? We did the same thing we did last time. We're going to come in several inches. We're going to leave that blue just hanging out there on the side. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to yarn over with our purple, just lay it right over your hook and pull through to finish that stitch. Then, like I said, I always like to give a little tug on the other color we just left in that tail to sort of cinch up that stitch a little bit. Now, if we want to, we can go ahead and put a stitch marker in there, but we're about to work back into there, so we'll leave that one out for now. And this is what it should look like after row 2. Row 3 is going to be a repeat of row 2, but we're going to be able to pick up our first color again when we get back to that side. So let's go. We'll do that, but maybe, Dana, do we need to take a little break first? I just spotted the time.
Yeah, this is perfect timing.
I was going to say, great timing right before I start a new row.
Yes. Okay. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to talk about our upcoming classes, and I'll thank our sponsor again. If people need to stretch, grab a glass of water, what have you. This is a good time to do it. So let me share my screen and pull up our presentation again. All right, so this is not the only class we've ever done. We love putting on these Zoom virtual crafting classes for you guys. And our next two classes are also free coming up the next couple weeks. Next week, we have Learn to Sew by Hand. That's with Rebecca George from Purple and Lime. That is same day, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. That's a brand new live class, like the class we're in today. It's a new live class. So definitely tune into that. And then say you guys are in the class right now, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed. I've never picked up a crochet hook before. Then you're going to want to look at our Learn to Crochet class in 2 weeks on Tuesday, November 1, also at 11 a.m. Central. That class is previously recorded, so you won't be able to ask questions in real time, but there's a ton of great info in there. And it's one of our most popular classes, so we rerun it quite frequently. You can sign up for any of our upcoming classes at favecrafts.eventbrite.com, and I'll include that link in the chat after the intermission. Thank you again to I Like Crochet Magazine for sponsoring today's class. If you are a brand new member, you can get the magazine for $5 US for an annual subscription. That's 90% off. When you sign up for the magazine, you get access to 6 issues. We publish 6 times a year, as well as all the previously published patterns since 2014. So that's an advantage of a digital magazine as opposed to print. The link to get the magazine is ilikecrochet.com/webinar22. Okay, I am going to turn it back over, Tamara. So yeah, thanks so much.
And hey, thanks for including the magazine where I got the cover on there for a shawl, no less.
Oh.
It's fun to see that pop up in the graphic. All right, so with that all said, now we are ready for row 3. So we're going to be doing the same thing again. We are going to chain 2 and turn, or turn and chain 2, whatever you like to do. And then just go ahead and start double crocheting for your row 3. Our first stitch gets 3 double crochets in it. So there's our third one. And then I'm just going to take a moment to put the stitch marker in that first one I made, so I know exactly where to stop when I come back for the next row. And then you'll notice too, I talked a little bit about making sure your yarn doesn't get twisted. When I take it off the hook, I like to drop it over my finger. That way I can drop it right back onto my hook, and that loop itself doesn't get twisted. To continue across, we're going to just keep working until we get to that marked stitch. So you can see just how quickly this shawl grows, and really how it works in any weight yarn. Any weight yarn, any hook you want to use. If you want a little closer stitches, smaller stitches, you could even use fingering or thread with this if you really wanted to make something very light and delicate. All right, so I've just double crocheted on across until I've gotten to that marked stitch again. So we do the same thing. 3 double crochets into that center marked stitch. So if you're watching TV in the evening, catching up on all the new horror movies this fall, you'll know, you'll be able to feel when you get to that stitch. It will remind you not to keep crocheting across straight. So I have to pull up a little bit more yarn there for my skein. But then I just move that stitch marker right on up that center stitch. Makes it so much easier when we're crocheting along, getting interrupted by life, to make sure we're always in the right place. So as I approach the end of this row here, I do need to pull up a little bit more yarn, but again, you can see in 3 rows how we're just growing outward, and you can just stop at whatever point you want to make your shawl the right size for you. I made a shawl that was using just these 3 skeins. You only needed 1 of each color, but you could definitely keep going. You could make this big enough to, cover the whole family on the couch if you wanted to. Alrighty, so we've got just a couple more stitches here to make before we get to this end. And this is where we're going to start working with those other colors again. It's time to switch back to the green. So we're going to do a couple of little moves that will make that easier. So for that very last stitch, I know I need to make 3 double crochets there because I started with 3 double crochets at the beginning, and I want to do the same thing at the end that I did at the beginning of the row so that it's balanced on both sides. So when we do it differently, we end up with things like asymmetrical shawls. So there's 2, and it's time for the third one. So we've got 2 double crochets worked into that stitch. I need to make 1 more, but I want to end up with my green yarn again for row 4. So I'm going to take a moment, find the end that's attached to the skein, not the cut end, and we're going to gently just bring that right along the side here. I'm going to go ahead and actually get this stitch marker out of the way for now. There we go. So I'm just going to gently bring that yarn right along the side of the previous stitch. And I'm going to yarn over, because we're still working in purple until we get that last yarn over. When I insert my hook in that stitch, before I yarn over and pull up my loop, I'm going to bring up that green and also drape it over my hook from front to back. A little different than we usually do in crochet. Drop it right over the hook. Then we want to just gently have it along the side. We don't want it really loose like this, and we don't want it really tight so that it's pulling our fabric up. We want it to just evenly lay along our stitch, and this may take some practice. We yarn over and pull our loop through, yarn over and pull through 2. Now with 2 loops left on the hook, we are going to gently grab that green again, yarn over, and pull through to finish that stitch. What does this do? What have we just done? Well, we've got our green back on our hook, so we can use green for our next row. And here is the green right along that edge. We've tacked it down with the bottom of the purple stitch so it's not floating this whole section along. But when we go back to make our edging, we can just crochet right over that, capture that just like we did the tail in our magic circle, and you won't be able to see it through our border. And this way, we'll be able to change colors every row just by picking up that yarn and using it again. So for row 4, we officially begin our repeat, and we're going to be back with color A. So we start our repeat with a chain 2, and we turn, and then we're going to work this entire row in the front loop only. I'll pull up a little bit more of my green yarn here. You may need to do the same. We don't want to have too much tension on our working yarn. That's how we end up with really tight stitches. There we go. So I've got my chain 2. I know I'm going to need to work 3 double crochets in that first row on across till I get to that first marked stitch. But what's different about row 4 is that we're going to work the entire row in the front loop only. So what does that mean? Well, it means we need to look at the top of the stitches that we're working into. If you've been crocheting for a while, you know there are 2 loops at the top of each stitch, right? We talk sometimes about how it's that V, how we can count those to count our stitches. The one that's closest to you, the crocheter, let me get this really close here and get a good focus here on the camera. The one that's closest to you, the crocheter, is the front loop. The one that's furthest away is the back loop. It doesn't matter if we turn our work. Now this is the front loop, and this is the back loop. It's always relative to you, the crocheter, so it just depends how you're looking at the fabric, whether it's a front loop or a back loop. If I worked under this loop right now, it would be a front loop. And then if I turn my work and wanted to work under the other loop, it would now be a front loop because I'm approaching it from this direction. So that's the thing to remember about front loop and back loop. It's the 2 loops at the top of the stitch, and it's all just relative to you, the crocheter. How are you looking at your project? So let me get my hook back in my loop here. There we are. And we want to crochet this entire row in the front loop only. So to do that, I'm going to yarn over because we're making double crochets. I'm going to try and pull the loops out of the way here so you can see. I'm going to go under just that front loop. So I'm going to bring my hook up right in the middle of that stitch. And I can yarn over and pull my loop through and finish my double crochet just as I normally would. You'll notice this pulls up on this loop a little bit here. That'll even out a little bit as we go. It'll seem kind of loosey-goosey when you first start it, but it will all even out. There we are. So I've got my 3 double crochets made in that first stitch. So I want to go ahead and grab a stitch marker and mark that first one. There we are. If I turn it over, you can see there's that unused loop in front. We'll see some more of those here, or on the other side, I should say. We'll see more of those here as we continue to work across. So let's take a few more stitches. We're going to double crochet in each stitch across again to that marked stitch, but we want to make sure we go under just that front loop, just the one that's closest to us, the crocheter. So we continue on across, working under that front loop only. So it can help sometimes if you want to angle your work a little bit. I like to angle it away from me a little bit more than I normally do. And you can use your fingers to really feel for just that one loop right there. Make sure you've got that other loop behind your hook. So now that we've made a few of those stitches, if I flip it over, you can see this is how we get sort of that little extra line that we see in the finished shawl. Little extra bit of definition. Another tip, working in the front loop only, if you are making something like a garment, adds to the drapiness. It makes the fabric a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner, and it will make your project, like I say, just a little bit drapier. There is some physics to it, I'm sure. I think it's just the angles of the way the stitches sit when you're making the stitches, but working in that front loop only, if you were to do that throughout for an entire piece, you'd get an even drapier piece. Now we've come to that center marked stitch, so we know that is our increase again, right in the middle of the pattern. We're increasing in 3 places. We add 2 extra stitches in the first stitch, we work 3 stitches in the middle, so that's 2 extra stitches there, and 3 extra stitches at the end, so that, or 3 stitches at the end, so that's 2 extra stitches there. So 6 stitches per row. So we've got 3 at the beginning, 3 in the middle, and 3 at the end. That's 2 extra, 2 extra, and 2 extra. So in our center marked stitch, we're going to work 3 double crochets, all again in that front loop only. So there's 1, and 2, and 3. And this is the stitch marker that we definitely want to go ahead and take our time to move up again. So I'm going to pull that out, that loop back on my finger there, and move that up to our center stitch again. We just want to make sure we keep that in our center stitch at all times. Then we continue to crochet across in that front loop only until we get to that very last stitch. And of course, in that very last stitch, we are again going to want to put 3 double crochets. I need to pull up a little bit more of my yarn. Now that our rows are getting a bit longer, I need more yarn here to get through each one. There we go. So there's the next one. We've got just a few more. And like I say, growing 6 stitches per row, you can see just how quickly this shawl will grow, particularly with this bulky weight yarn. So I'm almost to our marked stitch. Again, you can see it's pulling up a little bit more because I've got just that front loop. And then when I get to that last stitch, I'm going to put 3 double crochets all right into the front loop only of that marked stitch. So there's 1, 2, and before I begin that third one though, anytime we get to that last stitch, that's when we know we're going to be making our color changes from here on out. So let's go ahead and take that out. The stitch marker I put in the first and last stitch, the first stitch of each row, not the chain 2, the first stitch of each row. That way when I come back for the next row, I know exactly where to start and I don't accidentally stitch into those chain 2s. But now it's time to change our color. I'm going to yarn over and go into that stitch for our last double crochet. I'm going to drop that for just a moment. The next color in our sequence is the blue, or color B, whatever you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And again, I just want to drape it right over my hook. If you need to, give it a little, I always call it giving a little zhuzh. Give it a little pull, give it a little tug, make sure it's not too tight or too loose. Then we yarn over with the color we're using and just trap that right inside that stitch. Then we yarn over again and pull through 2. Then with 2 loops remaining on our hook, We drop our green all together, yarn over, and pull through with our blue. So you can double check it at this point. Is it pulling? Is it too tight? Is it too loose? This looks pretty good. It's just floating. There we go. If I lay it out, you can see how it's just kind of floating right along the edge there. So if you want to, when you start with the new color, you can also catch it down right there. But whatever works, we just want to make sure that it just floats right along that edge. Then we're ready for row 5. Row 5 and 6 are exactly what we did for row 2. We're working under both loops, but we know now, hopefully, a little bit of the pattern. You start with 3 stitches, work to the center marked stitch, put 3 stitches in there, and then work to the end and put 3 stitches in the last stitch. Row 4 is in the front loop only. That's what we just did. Row 5 and row 6 are exactly what we had been doing, where we work under both loops. Then when we get to row 7, it's a little different. We're going to work under the back loops. Because we only have an hour today, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a bit of row 7 for our project here, for our little demo. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 2 and turn and pretend that I'm ready to make row 7. Pull up a little bit more of my blue here, whatever color you end up working your row 7 in. We're going to be doing the same stitch pattern, but now we want to work in the back loop only. So to do that, we want to yarn over and put our hook right in the center of that V so that it goes under just the back loop. We're still working away from us in the same direction we always do. So we come in the middle of the stitch and go towards the back of our fabric. Then we can yarn over and pull up our loop and finish our double crochet just as we normally would. And it's the first one, so I like to mark it so that I know exactly where to end on the next row. Then I need 2 more in that same loop. Now that it's pulled up, it's really easy to see. You can go just around that loop right there. So there's 1, and there's 2. And then we just continue that across until we get to that center marked stitch. Then of course 3 stitches in there, and then on across to the end, 3 stitches in the end. You can see by working in that back loop only, now I've got this loop here. And that's part of the way this pattern works. You want to have those unused loops showing up on the same side of your fabric. So if I'd made 5 and 6, they would have. So this is the back of our shawl right here. And this would be the front of our shawl. And you can see a little bit right there and right there. That is the effect of that front loop only, back loop only action. It gives us just a little bit more definition and texture to our stitches. If you don't like it, you can work under both loops. It's totally optional. It's just an extra little touch that we can add to our stitch to add a little extra texture. So when you go to make your own shawl, if you don't like working under the front loop and back loop only, you can absolutely work under both of those loops. It is not a problem. All right, lost my little sample here, but I think hopefully you get the idea. We're going to work back and forth in those rows, back and forth, sometimes under the front loop, sometimes under the back loop, and that's going to give us some extra definition for our stitches and give us this really wonderful shape. You can see we've already got that really great triangle shawl shape going. So to make it to the size I wrote it out with, you would go for 24 rows total. Again, if you want to add more rows or subtract rows for a custom size, or because you're using a different yarn and therefore the size itself is different, that's totally fine. It's whatever makes you happy. You can go to whatever size you like. Then the last thing we need to do is add our border, and that's important because we really want to make sure that we cover up all of those floats and edges that we had along the side. So let's go ahead and say that rather than pulling up my color, I wanted to make my border in a special color. I wanted to use a different color, something out of order, maybe not the color that came next. So what would I do if I wanted to do that? I would have to re-add my yarn. So that's the one last stitch I want to teach you today before, other than making this edging itself. So I'm going to go ahead and say this green stripe was my last one. And I want to add, not the blue, which came next, but I wanted to add the purple. Because of course, when you're crocheting your project, you should make it for you. You should make it exactly the way you like it. And if you want to change it from the written pattern, then that's totally fine. So I would go ahead and cut all my yarns. There we are. And of course, I've just got the ends of those, each color, to weave in at this point. But let's go ahead and add that border. Let me pull up my yarn here. Let's get those ends set aside so we can see what we're doing. The last stitch I want to teach you here is a standing single crochet. So we want to do this from the right side. We want our edging or our border to be happening on the right side of our fabric. And we're going to join with a standing single crochet. Now, in our pattern, we would just continue with the color we're working with. So we would chain one, and then we want to put 2 back loop only single crochets in that first stitch. So we're going to join with a standing single crochet in the back loop only of that very first stitch. So we're combining a couple different things we've learned here, plus something new. I'm going to start by putting a loop in my yarn. Let me pull this out of the way so it's a little easier to see. Just going to put a little loop in it just like that, just like a little awareness ribbon. So that the tail end is over the end attached to the skein. And I'm going to pinch that right there and bring my hook from behind. What I want is for the tail end to be crossed over closer to the hook than the handle, so that I can hold this loop on my hook, like so. I'm going to hold on to that tail end so it's stabilized. I'm going to hold on to the end attached to my yarn. So you can see how that loop is on there. I'm going to pick up my work. I know that I want to single crochet in this first stitch in the back loop only. So I'm going to insert my hook just under that back loop. I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. So now I've got 2 loops on my hook, that active loop that I put on with that twist and the loop I just pulled up through the stitch. Finally, I'm going to yarn over and pull through both of those loops. That is a standing single crochet. Just like that, there's a single crochet worked in there. I did not do the join with a slip stitch and chain 1 and then start stitching. I went right in with the stitch itself. So there's lots of variations of standing stitches that you may want to learn as you continue your crochet journey, but that is the standing single crochet. So for projects where you don't want to join with a slip stitch and then chain and work your stitches, you can join right with the stitch itself. So to continue across here, for round one rather, of our edging or border, we put a second back loop only single crochet in that first stitch, and then we just back loop only single crochet in each stitch until we get to that marked stitch, of course, in the middle. Then we have 3 back loop only single crochets there. So that just gives us a really nice finished edge all the way around right here. You can see right here. Now, as you're working around this edge, of course, we don't have those ends or floats to work over. So I'm going to cheat a little bit again, just because we're running out of time, and pretend that I've gotten all the way around. So let's see that standing single crochet one more time. This time I'm just going to put that little twist in it with my fingers. Just get it back on camera there. Twist the yarn and put it on my hook. I'm going to hold onto my hook and that tail end of the yarn, and wherever I want to insert my stitch. This is the joy of joining this way. It can be in literally any stitch you want. I'm going to go ahead and pick the second to the last one here, just so I can get close to where we want to be. There's that last one. I know I'm going to put 2 in there because that's what I did at the beginning. 1 and 2. And then I'm going to go ahead and take that stitch marker out. We're doing our edging. We don't need it anymore. So now what I want to do is I'm going to work across this edge right here. And this is where I'm going to be able to cover up all of those floats. So I'm going to chain 1 because we're kind of turning a corner here, and it helps to have a little bit of a chain. And I want to work 2 single crochets in the end of each row. This is a good rule of thumb when you're working borders or edging. You want to have 2 single crochets at the end of each double crochet row. So to do that, I'm going to find that chain 2. Now I could work around the chain 2 and the double crochet, but working around just the chain 2 is also going to give us a little bit of a nicer edge. So I'm just going to go right around that stitch or that chain 2 and make 2 single crochets. So there's 1 and 2. come right down to the next stitch here, the next row. There's that single crochet, but I've got a float now because we're getting into it a little bit. We've got some color changes. So when I crochet into the side of this row, I put my hook right under there, that float now, I want to make sure that ends up above my hook so that when I make my single crochet, it's trapped and hidden inside. So there's my second one around that stitch. So let me get it turned a little bit here so it's easier to see. So I'm putting 2 single crochets in the side of each row. And when I do that, I make sure to work over that float so it's hidden. We've got a few more here we can do. We come to that next row. Now this is a tail end here, so I'm going to leave that hang. I don't want to work over that. I want to weave that in at the end. But the floats that are just hanging out here along the side, I want to make sure to cover those. So I go in on the side of that row, make sure that float or that carry is on top of my hook, and make my single crochets. There's 1 and 2. We come back here, we're getting towards the middle. This one is an end, so I want to drop that one. I am a big believer in weaving your ends in rather than just crocheting over them. Unless it's a very fuzzy or sticky yarn, you probably want to weave them in for the longevity of your project. So at this point, it was just row 1. We didn't have any floats. We can just crochet right into the side there. Then we can jump right to the other half. Find the other side, the other end of that row. Sometimes that first row wants to stick together. There we go. Now where you work into the sides of your stitches is up to you. Some people prefer to keep it around the post of the stitch. Some people like to work into the top. It's personal preference. I will change it up depending on the pattern I'm making and how my stitches are laying that day. So it's whatever works for you. But anytime we see one of those floats, we don't have one here because this is where we brought in the blue. We just want to make sure that we do crochet over those because those we can't weave in. Those are going to be there until, well, forever, basically. Those are going to be there forever. You can see here, we just crochet right along that top and we trap any of those floated yarns and then we weave in our ends. Let's pull up the finished one here so you can see that a little bit better. It's just big enough that it's hard to get all up on camera here. There we go. Here is a close-up of the top edge of that shawl. And you can see I just worked 2 single crochets in the side of each row. And any of those floats, because I can assure you I definitely floated my yarn, are trapped right in there. If you look very, very closely, you can kind of see, oh, there's a little bit of that yellow peeking out right there. But this is the wrong side of the shawl. And again, if anybody's getting that close to your shawl, they're probably getting a little too close. Or they're close enough that your shawl's not what they're worried about. So just working over those floats, let us change color every single row. And we've always got that other color right there waiting for us. As we go back and forth with our 3-color system, we leave this end hanging out here, come back with color 2. By the time we come back with color 3, that end's going to be on the right side waiting for us. So that really is the beauty of this technique of changing colors every 3 rows. You've always got that next color ready and waiting for you right where you need it. So were there any other questions I can answer? Dana, can you help me out?
Yeah, somebody was asking about your stitch markers and I was doing a little research. Do you know if they got discontinued?
They don't. They're just currently out of stock. I think I've been ordering too many. But there are lots of yes. These are the ones by Susan Bates. These are the stitch pins. These are currently, like you say, out of stock. But there are lots and lots of different brands of this style out there. So you can definitely take your pick. And sometimes people make fancier ones. I've also seen ones, some really beautiful ones on Etsy that will even use jewelry findings. The main thing is that they open up. So in a pinch, you can also use safety pins or paper clips, whatever you have handy. I know when I very first learned to crochet, I was using little scraps of yarn. So whatever works for you, again, as long as it works, then it works.
Yeah. And then I guess I just have a question for this technique.
Mm-hmm.
Would it work if you use any odd number of colors? Like say you want to do 5 different colors to carry the yarn up the edge?
Yes, but you want to make sure that you really tack those down. When we crocheted over it at the bottom of the stitch, the more stitch colors you use, the longer those floats are going to be. So you really want to make sure to tack those down as best you can as you go. But otherwise, yes, that should work. You've just got to kind of manage those floats a little bit more. So I'd say starting with 3 would be ideal.
Sure. Wonderful. I think that's it for questions.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
All right.
wonderful. Oh, great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tamara, for teaching our class today.
Sure.
Let me pull up our little slideshow so people know where to find you on social media. So Tamara's blog is Moogly Blog. You can find her on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest. You're on TikTok too, I think,
I
right?
am. Yeah, I'm just starting the TikTok thing. It's always a little intimidating to get into something like that, but I'm giving it a try.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so just search Moogly on whatever social media of
Yep.
choice and sign up for Tamara's newsletter as well, so you can get access to all the latest goings on Moogly blog. If anybody has questions for me about our webinars in general, logistic, housekeeping type things, what have you, you can reach me at dneald@primecp.com or events@primecp.com reaches me as well. Keep an eye out for an email from Zoom tomorrow with the link to this recording so you can rewatch it as much as you would like. And thanks again so much to I Like Crochet for sponsoring today's class. All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in our next class, I hope. Thanks again, Tamara.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.